So it doesn't make noise. Deveo, mics are up. Studio is live. Good morning, Lagos, and special thanks to you for listening and joining us here on Smooth 98.1. You're listening to Smooth Breakfast, and this is a time where we discuss in detail our newspaper stories inside of Freshly Pressed 91, and that's the name of the show. My name is Valentine, and joining me in the studio this morning to do analysis to these stories are three gentlemen. It's all testosterone in the studio this morning. Deveo Okorie is joining us this morning. Good morning, Deveo.
Good morning, Lagos.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, so a cool New Year, too fresh.
Right. Yesterday I ate so much I couldn't breathe properly. And of course we have Justin joining us as well this morning. Good morning, Justin.
Good morning, Lagos.
Justin Ijeh is his Twitter handle if you want to find him on Twitter. And of course Adedunmade. Good morning.
Good morning, Lagos, and thanks for bringing me back to reality.
Yes, it's hard to reach you on the phone, so yes. Glad to have you join us this year, 2019.
Text messages are always better.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting. Lagos, join us in a conversation this morning inside of Freshly Pressed 981. And let us know your views and observation regarding these stories. Send it to us on WhatsApp. Send it to 0809-444-0981. That is 0809-444-0981. You can also tweet at us at Smooth981FM. Use the hashtag FreshlyPressed981. Our first story is coming from Thisday newspaper this morning, talking about the generating companies of Nigeria. Gencos, Nigeria's electricity market operating without contractual terms is what they are saying. Deveo, if we look through the story, we'll find that Gencos are essentially the power generating companies of Nigeria. They've alleged that the transitional electricity market does not exist. That was unveiled in 2015 and makes provisions for the contractual terms to be met between the federal government and themselves. They said most of the practices, most of the agreements and the activities of the Gencos in generating power and providing electricity to Nigerian consumers are based on conjecture that, the regulatory body, let's talk about the Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading PLC, are supposed to put down a framework for agreements to be met on both ends, is essentially not working for them. What are your thoughts on this?
This is a heavy note to start the new year on, but it's a major position by the Gencos against the power sector reform. If you remember 2005 with the old administration where PHCN was split between the Gencos, the transmission company in Nigeria, and then Discos. Now, they've been screaming and shouting this for a long time now, that they made major investments, and at the end of the day, that the investments were supposed to be couched in these contracts, including the power purchase agreement, that's the PPA, the ancillary agreements, the gas supply agreements, and the vesting contract under the TEM. Now, the TEM came into being on February 2015, which was meant to ensure that they get paid through some of these procedures. Now, what they've said is that this has not happened, and it's been a major fallback on them because they have to now bear the burdens, and that the SLAs have completely failed. They're not enforceable by any form because these contracts in a way haven't been able to come to pass. Now, because of this, what has happened is that they're not able to meet up with their operations, even though some of them even brought in extra investments. They've had huge debt burdens that have put them in a tight corner. Now, for some time now, it's been in the news that they've been looking for alternate ways. Some of them have even gone ahead with implementing some alternate means of keeping their operations running. And this is where the problem lies, when the Genco says that, can we just supply just distributors directly, or can we supply locations, like for example in Lagos here, instead of supplying gas to the grid, which goes to one long location, sometimes it goes outside Lagos before it comes back to Lagos, why not just take Lekki and supply Lekki?
Because they know that they're going to get direct returns.
So they're going to get direct returns. Obviously, it affects the structure, which is supposed to pass through the discos before it gets back to them.
So as equally distributed to everybody else.
Yes. Now, the off-taker, MBET, who is the government's face in terms of sealing these contracts, hasn't made a statement to this response. But what it means is that there are many, many problems ahead. Two, they've also accused the federal government of supplying electricity to West African countries on a diplomatic means, about 300 megawatts, rather than with regard to commercial terms, which is faced within the multi-year tariff order. I think the power reform is still in the doldrums. The conundrum with power. I don't understand why it eludes Nigeria from decade to decade. When Fashola was referred to as Minister of Darkness, it was not in vain, because till date, this is a huge, because the main reason to break the power sector down was to bring in efficiency and bring lights.
But it seems like the federal government, speaking through the mouth of Fashola, really saying that the government is not to blame, that they're necessarily not the cause of this power problem. So where does the problem lie now?
Someone has to take the bulk at the end of the day, even though they said in a not even diplomatic, it's almost an irresponsible fashion that they have handed over. The full liberalization must work when every joint of the process is in order.
Yeah.
So here you're hearing that the Gencos have accused them directly that even though you said you would pay us, we haven't been paid. So who's lying? Who's being irresponsible? I think the federal government, and if this government wants our vote come 2019, sorry, we are in 2019.
Yes, we are here.
In a few months' time, then they need to get serious.
In a few weeks.
In a few weeks, they need to get serious about providing us light.
Thank you very much. Moving on to this next story from Thisday newspaper. I'll still stick with you, Deveo, for this one. NNPC, PSCs now account for most of Nigeria's oil production. Now, I'll give you the details of this and tell you why this is very, it seems very essential and important for us to look through. So PSCs relate to production sharing contracts now that's used as a basis for operation of this in oil and gas. Now, most crude oil produced by this story in Nigeria's Niger Delta region now come from the PSCs, according to a recent report by the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. And the PSCs have their operations majorly on offshore sites. And it seems from this a tally that we're getting, they said they're producing PSC fields are producing over 310 million barrels over the venture agreements, the joint venture agreements, JVAs, indicating that the difference really marks a win for Nigeria's oil and gas production. And based on the fact that the PSCs are mostly located offshore, it eliminates some of the constraints that affect oil production in Nigeria, from pipeline vandalization and attacks of such, making them, incur losses. So by this generation, most of the people, the parties involved, especially from on the part of the federal government, are saying this gives us more generation for oil and gas based on the fact that we're relying on this, and we know of this benchmark that was placed in the 2019 budget. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, there's one line here that I want to base this story on. When we don't plan, we live with the consequences of our own actions. Well, as you know, with the turbulence that took place within the Niger Delta for many years, this is the final result. The joint ventures did have more allocation. That's where Nigeria participates with some of the major oil production companies to produce and sell.
Yes.
Now, the PSCs are companies who take on the whole cost upfront, and in most cases, they take on fields that most people were not commercially aware would produce.
Yes.
So they take on that
so
cost.
they take on more risk.
They take on more risk, and if it doesn't produce as expected, they take the loss. If it does produce, to their own advantage. So obviously the government, as black people, if I dare say, we put ourselves on the side where we could be sure. But with the turbulence of the Niger Delta, finally now it's playing out, and the production sharing companies have done quite well, and they're now producing at about 310 million barrels, while the JV companies are doing about 245. Now, there's a line here that says that obviously this is because the PSCs are mostly located offshore, and this brings about some equity in their production. However, the change in the production structure pushes before the need to renegotiate terms of the PSC stipulated in the deep offshore inland basin production sharing contracts to increase government's take. Really? Now you wake up to it. Now you realize you want a piece of that cake.
When it happens like this, when this kind of news comes to the fore, you'd find out that these parties who are invested in the PSCs will now be looking towards areas of royalty payments.
This is even
leveraging on the tax waivers. And
the laziest thing that government can do. Now, mind you, and the part that's not mentioned here is that even on the JV side, government reneged on a lot. Well, not say reneged. They were not able to meet up with their obligations.
Because they had issues that they could not contend with.
Yes, but from the days of cash calls.
Vandalism.
Cash call is a financing process whereby Everybody brings money to the table, you spend, you do your business. That was the business before. Government wasn't meeting up with its own expectations. And at the final, to rescue them, they had to ask the JVs to carry the cost completely and then net from source. There's a lot of laziness and a lot of issues going on with our government. We have to be careful.
Thank you very much, Deveo, for that spirited analysis. Let's move to this next story. We'll jump to this one from Telegraph. I'll come to you, Justin, for analysis on this. Prepare for prolonged nationwide strike, NLC tells Nigerians. And we see that there's been back and forth that has been going on. In fact, whenever I see news on minimum wage, sometimes I just shake my head. Like, again, are we still talking about this? But the Nigerian Labour Congress yesterday urged Nigerian workers and citizenry to brace up for a prolonged nationwide strike. They said the ultimatum they gave the federal government to meet up and implement the 30,000 naira minimum wage that was suggested, that was put forward, and according to them, agreed upon by the tripartite committee, is still not met. So we're still here.
Yes, we're still here. We spoke about this yesterday, remember?
Yes, we did.
We touched on this yesterday. And as of yesterday's headline, they were talking about a one-day warning strike. Well, it's very quickly morphed into a warning about a prolonged nationwide strike by the NLC. And it's just ridiculous that we always find ourselves in this situation, yes, where the government and labor starts playing chicken with one another and we are caught in between. Now, there's a related story where it's funny. The government set up a technical committee, right, to look into the new minimum wage issue previously. And then, in his recent speech, Mr. President has announced that a technical committee is now going to be set up. And the Minister for Labour is saying, oh, that technical committee's job is not to review the work of the minimum wage tripartite committee. So what exactly is their job? Why do you need a committee after another committee has done the work?
Because we set up committees to review what another committee has reviewed, done. And then set up another committee to implement that, and then another committee to supervise the implementation.
It's ridiculous. Now, Ayuba Waba of Labour, who is the one who's made the announcement of Labour's intention, has basically is calling the government's bluff. That's why we're heading into Oki's corral for the standoff right now. And he's saying, listen, we gave a deadline. The committee has done the work. We are not discussing the monetary side of this thing. We've agreed on 30,000 naira.
So what is holding us?
You're supposed to transmit a bill to the National Assembly to pass this into law. And our senators went on recess, they went politicking, went rallying, and they are now saying, oh, you know what, the minister, Mr. Gige, is now saying, yeah, so we have this new committee, and then we have the bill. We're going to review, we've invited Labour again to have a conversation, and we're going to review it on the 4th of January. But these guys give you a deadline for 31st December.
We recall that one of the first stories really that brought this back to mind. Thus, a couple of days ago, the Nigerian Labour Congress came up with the allegation that, or rather, a suggestion to the federal government to prosecute the governors who are saying that they cannot pay 30,000 naira and pointing fingers to the Paris Club for. So they see that money kept there. What are you using it for? Some of the governors are putting it in a fixed deposit account. So how can you not, respond to that? The governors reacted to that, and I guess it's based on the governor's reaction that they're making this threat at this point.
I always say that one of the core problems that we have with fiscal responsibility in Nigeria and other issues is rooted in campaign financing, right? If we dig into how, this is a bit of a segue away from the story, but it's relevant, right? That's why I'm bringing it up.
Okay.
If we look into how the political parties in Nigeria are funded, you will realize that the root of why our monies always go missing and we can't seem to spend money on the things that do matter circles around that issue. The Paris Club funds is a big black hole that's a real conversation needs to be had about. But at the end of the day, as concerns this story, really, once again, we played ourselves, and it's the people, it's the common Nigerian that is going to suffer for this if this strike goes ahead, if they do not come to a settlement.
Okay. I'll renew you in default to the story because let's look at this other story report from Vanguard newspaper. Minimum wage, federal government invites Labour for briefing January 4th, reviewing committee report. They've said that the technical committee announced by President Muhammad Buhari to be set up on new minimum wage was not to review, according to what Justin pointed out, really. But they said that the Minister of Labour and Employment, Senator Chris Ngige, told reporters in a telephone interview at a conversation that the Attorney General of the Federation and the Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami, were looking into the minimum wage bill submitted by the tripartite committee. Looking into a bill is one thing, but do you anticipate a conclusion to this issue when we meet in 2 days?
I don't think they will meet.
If they meet.
Because based on this story, just like you heard from Justin's position, they're not meant to meet because they finalized it. So what are we still looking at again? The minister did mention that the money that they're expecting was captured in the 2019 budget. So Labour's position is that they're buying time with it. So
Because we know the budget is not coming anytime
yes,
soon.
not coming anytime soon. Neither has it been funded, and you know this would be the homework of whoever is taking the presidency next.
Yes.
Now, Labour has also mentioned up front in terms of threats that if you don't pay it, you're not going to be voted for. That's one position. Secondly, they've also said they're going on this mother of all strikes. Now, I think people should prepare for this strike because I don't see government coming around to support them. Secondly, I also think Labour needs to get a bit more pragmatic in terms of their solutions. They need to work with government in terms of how we can get out of this. One, they're looking at the size of government. This is one of the largest governments in the world. You have, apart from the ghost workers, you have people who practically do nothing or people who don't do enough. Productivity is at its lowest, it's not measured. So if you can cut down on that, you're creating some savings to be able to offset some backlog. Secondly, it's not just the issue of travel that are leakage points in government operations. There's so many leakage points that they need to pinpoint as Labour officials to be able to save some money for government. Thirdly, cutting down on cadre payments. Many of the senior level officers in government earn high amounts on salary and allowances. Now this cuts across both the executive, the legislature, appointed officials, and quote. If they can cut down on the size of their salaries, just like the National Assembly fat cats that earn, I think, $750 in terms of salary,
Maybe regularize it.
and then earn like 15 million in terms of allowances. If they could, it's either they meet up square, they equate that with everyone, or they cut down so that everyone can carry this burden. There's so many opportunities for them to make savings, to be able to come out of this situation. It's unfortunate that we always end up simply just shutting down the whole government and saying that there's no way forward.
Justin, you have a thought to add?
Yeah, just to add to what he's talking about when it comes to what Labour should be doing. I recall that the Labour Party in this country is actually owned by the Labour Union, right? That's a political platform.
How about pushing your
How
cost
about
through
pushing your cost through that instead of selling it out to the usual?
Very, very
If they
important
stop
point.
receiving 5,000 by the side, maybe they will
Oh
make
boy.
that way.
Our next story is from Guardian newspaper. Federal government provides funds to meet ASUU's demands. They've been on strike for a while now. That protracted strike by the
Another
Academic
strike.
Staff Union of Universities. And it's important that we treat this because Minister of Labour and Employment is still weighing in on this. Dr. Chris Ijeh, he gave the hint in Onitsha saying that the funds have been provided for to meet most of the demands of the union. Adedunmade, please take us through this.
Oh well, ASUU, here we are again. I remember back in my uni days, I also had to stay home for a couple of months, and it's sad to see that in 2019 it's actually still happening. It's instructive to know that since 1999, ASUU has gone on strike about 14 times. You know, from 2001, 2002, and so many years in between. And it's even more interesting to note that some of the issues being debated currently is part or are part of the 2009 agreement with the federal government at that time. So if 10 years later we're still battling over one agreement, then I don't actually see what these meetings or the solutions that we are doing now is going to help. See, we have to understand one thing here. We have a problem with our educational system. We all know that, the government knows that, the international community knows that. We need to increase our funding of education in Nigeria. We all know that. It just seems like we know things, but we don't do them. Like we know what to do, but we don't do them.
Zombie.
Well, thank you so much for that. Now, what we need to ask ourselves is this another temporary fix? Because they're going to pick
Because
some
he
funds
used
now.
he used the word some. some of the issues.
Some, so definitely that means
It's not
that
all encompassing.
Exactly. So we're going to be here. They're going to call off the strike for, let's say, a few more months. Then later, before the end of the year, they'll come back to the table again and call another strike.
Let's be
Or maybe
optimistic.
next year.
Maybe they'll address most of the major issues, because if you're presenting a proposal to a company, you know that you will couch most of your proposal around the things that would be achievable.
Optimism is
Not
great.
expecting 100% compliance. maybe.
Optimism is wonderful. It's a great thing, and I agree with you that yes, in some things we should be optimists. But for this one, I'm going to let experience guide me. Now, in 1999, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2005, 2006, 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13, 17, and 18, we've gone on strike. So I will let that experience guide me. I know that in the next 1 year or 2 years, we are going to go again, because this
when
is
you
a
do
cycle.
the same thing over and over,
And you expect a different result.
Nigeria,
Now that you put it that way, it just leaves me very perturbed. Let's take messages here on WhatsApp.
optimism.
Shall I send a message on WhatsApp? Shall I say NLC is like the statued horses on race course? They should either go hard or go home. They just keep shouting. Okay. Chibike Osita says power must be decentralized because before it will work, having national grid hasn't helped. Common sense knows that it's easier to generate power in a place and use it in that same place rather than transmitting it to a very far place for use. It is not economical. He also speaks on the issue of strike. He says it's inevitable because our government is not willing to do the right thing. Government has been committing impeachable offenses by not implementing new minimum wage after it's long overdue. My fear is, can Labour be resolute to fight this battle? There's a key question there. Talking about key things, now key Nigerian deepwater field achieves first oil, adds 200,000 barrels to country's daily output. And I hear the ministers and Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, rejoicing, jubilating to this. It's a report from Premium Times newspaper. The Nigeria deepwater oil field that we're talking about is Egina. It achieved the first oil production late Saturday, the 29th of December, raising the country's daily output production above 2.09 million barrels in December of 2018. Why do you think they're celebrating this, Justin? Do you think it's closely linked to the benchmark they put? Because we're casting aspersions as that.
It confuses me when I hear the celebrations, because yes, Egina, long-awaited Egina has finally struck first oil. It's finally pumping, it's finally producing, and our installed capacity as a country has increased by about 200,000 barrels per day of crude and about 500,000 barrels of condensate.
Yes.
However, that what would ordinarily be a cause to celebrate is dampened by a lot of other factors which they should actually be concerned about instead of throwing a party, as it were. OPEC has decided to cut production benchmarks.
Yes.
Last year when they did it, or last time they did it, Nigeria was exempted. This time we've not been exempted. OPEC is cutting 800,000 BPD from production benchmarks and production targets.
That's barrels per day.
Barrels per day, sorry. Yeah, and Nigeria has to therefore cut about 43,000 barrels per day from about 1.7 million where we were at last year. Now remember, Egina brings us to 2 million barrels per day.
Okay.
The extra from Egina brings us to 2 million barrels per day capacity.
200,000?
200,000 barrels per day is what Egina is bringing.
Okay, that's what
so when you add Egina to Nigeria's previous production, yes, national production, that brings us to 2 million, slightly over 2 million.
Okay.
However, you can't, because of the OPEC cut, take any advantage of that. It does nothing for us at this point in time, because of the cuts, you have to shut that capacity in.
Wow.
So why are we celebrating? Why are we throwing a party? And people are talking about we are optimistic. Well, you don't run an economy based on
optimism.
Say it again.
You don't run an economy based on optimism.
Repeat.
Wow. We have messages today, Lagos. You're listening to Freshly Pressed 91 here on Smooth 98.1. Yinka sends the message, says, see guys, it takes a lot of courage for a man to admit that he's being scammed. It's high time for the NLC to man up and come out to admit that they've been scammed by the federal government led by Mr. Integrity. I'm surprised that we're still talking about NLC 30,000 naira committee and all that, because the noise the last time is that the issue had been sorted. What is all these ones now? Who's meeting who? Is it now just that we just got to the payment schedule Excel file of everyone and multiplied by factor? What again? Is what the Yinka is asking. Thank you very much, Yinka. Shegun sent in a message. It says, since 1999, education has been systemically decimated because the ruling class wants their private institutions to flourish. Okay, conspiracy theory then.
Ideas.
Moving on to this next story from Guardian newspaper. Government begins mandatory use of NIN, that's National Identification Numbers, in provision of services. That is what the report here says. And if you look through the story, Justin, what are the implications of this? The enforcement might just send a jitter to a lot of people's spines.
Now, this is one thing.
Federal ministries, departments, and agencies, they said those that take records of personnel and provide services requiring identification of any person shall, from January 1st, 2019, mandatorily use and demand for the national identification numbers from citizens to offer the services they provide.
So, the NIN is a huge plus for us. Caveat being how we optimize it,
Yeah.
how we execute matters.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I was part of this project from a private sector perspective,
Okay.
in non-paid private sector perspective.
It's good you make that clear.
What else would you have said?
Exactly. And the entire vision of the NIN is, I hate to draw the comparison because we always seem to compare ourselves with them, but if you think about the social security number in the US and how it's linked to your identity as a human being,
At least it's close in comparison.
as far as the vision goes,
biometric capturing.
yes, and all of that. But to get to the issue in this story, like you said, there is a fear because once again we seem to be doing it by the jackboot mentality. Take a cutoff date, and after that, anybody who hasn't done it. But I happen to know the management team there, and I think what they are going to do is, and he's actually the DG has actually mentioned it here. They will work with all these agencies, and they will open up the enrollment process and make it a lot more robust. So a lot more people simultaneous with this so-called deadline, right, will be enrolled to have their NINs. There's been a huge amount of progress in the number of people enrolled. I don't have the current figures, but it's really grown lately.
So moving on now, let's speak a better English. Well, I would say better English. Let's break it down to the layman. If you haven't registered today,
yes,
what are the implications that you're going to face? What limited resources are you or services are you going to be blocked away from, and how going forward do other people register?
So all of these agencies that have been listed, Federal Road Safety, the immigrations for the passport, the police, and all of that, they are now going to be themselves points of enrollment. So if you walked in to get service,
fresh enrollment,
can
they go back to the
you could actually do it online.
Okay.
You could actually do it online. They have an online portal for this, right? So you could upload your biodata and then you could upload your data and then do the capturing of the biometrics at those points. So what I think they're trying to do is get biometric capture devices into all those agencies, and if you come in and you haven't already done it, you do it right there and then. So, and he's also been careful to say that you are not going to be denied of service, even though there seems to be a conflict in how it's reported.
I don't see anything happening. This is public sector government. They never get it right. If the private sector struggled with SIM card registration, what are we expecting with the public sector?
Behind the scenes, this project was actually driven by the private sector.
Oh.
Yeah. Otherwise, it would never have happened.
Well, let's see.
Thank you,
At least now they will not slam anybody with $5 billion.
For the purpose of education and information, really, let everybody, the listeners, please go to the website www.nimc.gov.ng/pre-enrollment, or just go to www.nimc.gov.ng, .gov.ng, to find out the steps taken that you take to enroll for NIN.
BVM took how long?
Okay. Let's go to this next story from Thisday newspaper. I'll come to you, Adedunmade, for this one. Shettima admits worsening security situation in Borno. The governor of Borno State, Alhaji Kashim Shettima, has said that the security situation in the troubled state is worsening, but said that he could not blame President Muhammadu Buhari for the situation because he now has unfettered access to the president, unlike during the administration of the past president. It seems to me like political rhetoric, but what do you take from this?
Yeah, so what I was asking myself is, okay, so this access that he has to the president, like, what is that going to do with us? Like, how does that save lives? How does that prevent people from being killed? How does that ensure there's more security in the state, at least within his state? You know, I don't think that points us in any direction on the solutions that might bring. Now we have to understand that this is Boko Haram that has killed over 100,000 people, displaced over 2 million, and has made over 50 billion orphans. Now in Borno alone, the damage that has been caused, as stated by the governor, will cost about $6 billion to the infrastructure of the state. Now, the governor has still not brought out a concrete plan to show that there's something being done to actually reduce this rate of insecurity in the state. Because Boko Haram is still going on strong. They're still attacking military posts and they're getting away with it. Although I agree that they've been repelled in some instances, but we've lost soldiers, we continue to lose them. So Nigerians have to ask, you know, we're in a new year now, we just have to ask our governments for new things. We don't want half-baked solutions. We want full solutions. We want to see Boko Haram totally gone. Boko Haram, ISWAP, whatever name they want to be called now.
Thank you very much, Adedunmade. Thank you, gentlemen. Lagos, please follow them on Twitter, on social media generally, at Justin Ijeh, at Deveo Okorie, at Adedunmade, just at Adedunmade. A special thanks to everybody who sent in messages. Please stay with us at 9 o'clock. We'll discuss extensively one of the major issues treated here inside of Freshly Press 91, and that will be in time for Lagos Talks 91. We'll open up the phone lines for you to call. Coming up next at 8:15, we'll talk sports inside the locker room. Good morning.
You should do the NIN story for Lagos Talk.